Great. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's lunch break. I'm Carrie, and today we're talking with Laura Splan to learn about her work and what she's been up to recently. Laura is a Brooklyn-based artist whose work intersects science, technology, design, and craft. Her projects mine the materiality of the biomedical landscape to reveal poetic subjectivities, hidden systems, and invisible labor. She combines textiles with technology to challenge values of the hand in creative production and to question notions of agency and chance in aesthetics. We're so happy to have you here today, Laura. Her work also appeared in our inaugural exhibition, What Lies Beneath. For everyone who's joining us, we will have a Q&A portion at the end, so you can write in any questions you have throughout the talk through the Q&A chat box, and we'll be answering a few of those. So to start off, Laura, can you tell us a little bit about the mediums and the subjects you use in your work?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me and inviting me to be part of the LunchBreak SciArt series. I want to start by apologizing for any noise you might hear outside my studio, which is actually on a pretty heavily trafficked street. So such is the Zoom talk. My work as a whole explores intersections of science, technology, and culture to destabilize and reframe our relationship with the everyday, and to even redefine what the everyday means. And I often mine the materiality of the biomedical landscape and domestic landscape to make poetic connections behind hidden structures and unseen labor. In 2004, I created a series of lace viruses in response to the 2002 SARS outbreak and our increasing unease with the microbial world. This project was grounded in the intricacy of textiles and its associations with familiarity and comfort, while also being driven by a deep fascination with the seductive and sometimes alien representations of the biological world. I often try to compel an intimate engagement with detail, calling into question how things are made and what they are made of. And I use processes that challenge notions of what is made by hand and what is made by machine, what is natural and what is fabricated, and what is science and what is culture. I am especially interested in the history of the invention of scientific apparatus and the cultural circumstances in which they are conceived. The history of René Laennec's invention of the stethoscope in 1816 is fraught with varying accounts of its conception that cite gender relations as much as technical research in auscultation. One version of its invention tells a story of a well-endowed female patient who by some accounts was too modest to have Laennec lay his head on her chest. By other accounts, it was he that was too modest. Laennec's solution to the socially awkward moment was to roll up a sheet of paper to create his first iteration of the stethoscope. The stethoscope itself embodies a social paradigm, a prescribed comfortable distance between doctor and patient, male and female. In my stethoscope sculpture that I made in 2002, I extended the length of the instrument to 25 feet, the longest distance at which one can still hear a heart beating at the other end. Its absurdity belies its continued, albeit diminished, function and questions the technical standards on which the institutional device is based. In many of my projects, I use my own body in the production of material and of form. And in 2009, I created a series of sculptures with remnant gel facial mask peeled from my own body. And this over-the-counter beauty product picks up and retains the detailed impression of texture and hairs on skin. Handkerchief, Anatomy of Tears, is embellished with a design based on the anatomy of a human tear duct. Lacrimal and nasolacrimal glands and ducts appear as decorative motif on the handkerchief constructed out of the water-soluble facial peel. The very materiality of its form undermines its intended function. And my embodied object series uses electromyography sensors to create data-driven artworks. Neuromuscular activities associated with experiences of wonder were performed as facial expressions and bodily movements, such as smiling in delight, blinking in disbelief, or frowning in confusion. And each activity produced unique data captured by an EMG sensor that was translated into a curve using custom software, which I then created data-driven patterns and forms with, including 3D printed sculptures and computerized jacquard weavings. With this weaving titled Undo, I recorded muscle movement as I was unraveling another tapestry. And Blank Stare is a series of laser etchings on watercolor paper with electroencephalography data-driven patterns. And the series integrates waveforms of fluctuating levels of attention recorded with an EEG sensor. And the fine lines burned into the paper in this repeated radial pattern create a visual focal point in the center of each etching. And each print in the series repeats a single EEG waveform recorded while I stared at a blank sheet of watercolor paper for 60 seconds. And the projects, these data-driven projects, examine the potential for objects to embody human experience and to materialize the intangible. And I'm continuing to interrogate these intersections of internal and external worlds as they are mediated by science and technology.
Wonderful, thank you. So fascinating, the different subjects you cover, and talking about your own skin and distance between people is striking me as so relevant to today. Would you tell us about what you've been working on more recently?
Sure. So in 2018, I began working with the wool of laboratory llamas and alpacas who are used to produce antibodies for human drugs, including vaccines and antiviral treatments. And I began by hand washing and carding and spinning the fiber into yarn to be used in sculptures and installations. And in an exhibition at the Esther Klein Gallery in Philadelphia last year, I situated these sculptures made with the hand-spun yarn among other artworks that referenced the invisible artifacts of biotechnology, including photographs and sculptures, and also animations made with molecular modeling software. And by using the sculpting feature, this quote-unquote sculpting feature, in the software in unconventional ways, the animation became a collaborative doodle of sorts between the software, my hand, and the molecular structures that are being disrupted. And as the protein structures were manipulated, the software rendered uncanny disturbances. And the work in the exhibition attempted to question notions of the presence and absence of bodies, evoking the mutability of categories that delineate their status. And so Lumen choreographs viewers' movements to sit on a rug made with the wool of these laboratory animals. And in biology, the lumen is the interior part of a cell where a protein is folded and modified. And sitting on the rug engages viewers with the unseen materialities and labor of biotechnology as they touch the yarn and listen to an accompanying sound on the headphones. And the soundscape layers recordings made in Integral Molecular's biotech laboratory, where I was actually in residence at the Science Center in Philadelphia in 2018. And Integral Molecular actually procured the wool for me from another laboratory. And while I was processing the llama wool in my studio, I would often find clumps of feces, which I began to look for and collect for this networked laboratory mixer sculpture that's agitated by Twitter. So this device activates when Twitter hashtags associated with the culturally contested status of science are tweeted.
Wow.
So here the mere mention of global warming or diversity agitates tubes filled with laboratory animal feces. Since taking office, the Trump administration has advised how to improve the chances of receiving research funding with the suggestion to avoid words and phrases such as vulnerable, diversity, entitlement, transgender, fetus, evidence-based, and science-based. And the administration, of course, has also refused to sign statements that mention climate change. And virologist Ben Duran's added the timely contribution of vaccination to this growing list of terms. So as viewers exited the exhibition, there was faint text on a wall that invited them to come close to read. And the text said, "Our distance allows our intimacy." And the phrase refers to the complexities of existence in the biotechnological age, where understanding of our own bodies and the bodies of others is increasingly mediated by technology. So this sculpture blows a breeze in the viewer's face as they read the text. And the speed of the networked fan is intermittently adjusted to the wind conditions at a farm in Western Pennsylvania. And the farm is actually the 600-acre biological laboratory that gave me the wool from the 2018 shearing of their llamas. And earlier this year, they invited me for a 3-hour tour of their sprawling facilities to meet the llamas. And I also recently did a bioart residency at Coalesce at the University of Buffalo earlier. This was in January, February. And I wanted to see what would happen if I brought this material back into the laboratory and what could be explored around notions of hybridity, transgression of boundaries, engineered bodies, and invisible labor. So I came to Coalesce with the goal of genetically manipulating bacteria to produce pigment to be used to dye this yarn. And to do this, I used a laboratory technique called bacterial transformation, in which a cell is genetically manipulated to incorporate DNA from its surroundings through its cell membrane. And this commonly used lab technique is used to introduce a foreign plasmid, or DNA, into bacteria. And the bacteria then amplifies the plasmid, making large quantities of it. And a plasmid is a small circular piece of DNA that contains genetic information for the growth of bacteria. And I was working with a few different plasmids that might be used to dye the yarn. And I was working with E. coli bacteria, which is often referred to as the workhorse of the laboratory. And for a transformation to take place, the bacteria must be in a state of what's called competence, or having small holes in the bacterial cells for a DNA plasmid to pass through. And I was particularly interested in the narrative implications of this transgression of boundaries, as it was being choreographed in this decidedly Baroque approach to artificially producing pigments that actually already occur naturally in other bacteria. And the residency supported me in the development of several protocols that I would need to transform bacteria to produce different pigment and color for dyeing the yarn, including fluorescence, which you can see being illuminated with a UV light here, also purple, blue, and green. And my research there also included comparing the undyed and dyed fibers of yarn using different techniques, including their microscopy facilities. And this project is a bit in suspension as I'm waiting to have access to a lab to continue production on what will be new textile sculptures and installations for upcoming exhibitions.
Great. I just have to ask, is your Twitter machine still active? Is it going off somewhere?
No, I don't have it connected right now.
Okay.
It was connected for the entire duration of the exhibition. And in fact, it was just left running all the time.
That's such an interesting thing. So of course, this is a strange time to be creating, but where can we look to see what you're doing and keep up with your work?
So I'm actually going to be in a solo exhibition, Austin Peay State University in Clarksville, Tennessee. My home state is presenting a solo exhibition of new and recent work in February 2020. And earlier this year, I began creating new molecular modeling animations with the PyMol software that will also be included in this exhibition. And these animations are being created in a new remote collaboration with Integral Molecular based on their current research on the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein. And it was a residency that I proposed exactly out of this desire to continue to make work in this physically distanced world that we're living in. So they were very generous to start working with me in this remote collaboration. And the residency includes discussions of both the scientific and creative implications of molecular imaging. And the lab is assisting me in finding specific models for use in the PyMol software. And as I've been sharing animation tests with the scientists, new conversations are emerging around topics like aesthetics and within the software and the role of the spike protein's structure in and structural changes in infectivity. And these animations are really part of this continued exploration of interconnected systems as they are affected by both human and natural forces at macro and micro scales. And so by leveraging these specialized commands and unique features of the PyMol software, I'm hoping to kind of evoke this precarity of underlying structures that has been rendered so visible right now during the coronavirus pandemic.
Yeah, totally.
And so I'll be giving an online talk about these new animations in progress on June 25th and at 5 p.m. And my solo exhibition at APSU opens in February next year. And you can subscribe to my studio newsletter for updates on upcoming exhibitions and events. And I'll be posting some experiments with the bacterial transformation and also the animations on my Instagram and more frequently and other social media.
Wonderful, great, thank you. So we are going to take some questions now, and Julie is going to hop in for that.
Okay.
Hey, Laura, thank you so much for sharing your work. It's great to know that you're still able to be actively creating during this time and exploring new aspects within your work. So we have a couple questions in. The first is, can you just let us know what time zone that June 25th talk is in?
That's Eastern. Yeah.
Okay, great. Good to know. Another question, we have an audience member who is curious about the longevity of the face peel with lace. Can you talk about the fragility and strength of these materials?
So the fragility of the facial peel is the question. Yeah, so that project kind of came on the tail end of working with the computerized embroidery with the lace viruses. So I was curious what other substrates I might embroider onto with this computerized embroidery machine. So with the lace viruses, they're embroidered onto a water-soluble fabric. And so when you dissolve the substrate, you're just left with the doily. And I was getting curious about what other substrates I can embroider on. And in fact, the material the water-soluble material I was embroidering on was very much like remnant facial peel. It was kind of this clear, cloudy, plasticky material. So I started to use my body to just produce some test swatches, so to speak, where I would just cover like my stomach or my whole stomach and back with the facial peel and peel that off in one large piece. And then I could hoop that on this embroidery hoop to be used on this computerized machine. And there was a lot of failure involved because it is in fact a very fragile material, but I was determined and figured out how to do this, and basically just did like 2 and 3 ply pieces for most of the embroidery, and was actually quite surprised how durable and robust the material has been. I started those sculptures, I believe, in 2007, and all of the sculptures are still, as you know, in the same condition as the day that I created them. One of the quirks of the material is it's very sensitive to humidity, so they become very stiff in dry environments and kind of lilt a bit in humid environments. But that fragility and that precarity and that kind of like visible failure with the rips and tears and holes in some of these sculptures is precisely what drew me to that material. I was really interested in how that became part of the experience, or the kind of inspection, the experience of inspection of these pieces.
Great. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's, you know, things change over time, right? But it kind of adds to the meaning of the piece as well. It feeds back into itself. Another question, could you elaborate on the reactions of scientists to your work? Have you had any surprising reactions? This relates to a question I had, which is your experience working with scientists, because obviously a lot of your work does involve direct communication or cooperation from scientists. And just, if you could just talk a little bit about that aspect of your experience. I think a lot of our listeners are people who maybe have been hesitant to try and collaborate with a scientist or approach scientific institutions, and just kind of the methods that you've developed to do it so successfully.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've had a whole range of reactions from scientists to the work. I mean, there are a lot of scientists who are, you know, kind of reading and recognizing the beauty of microbes for the same reasons that I was drawn to some of the imagery that I've been working with. But I've also had some really wonderful conversations with scientists about subjectivity in scientific imaging and scientific tools and techniques, and how there's all these moments in laboratory processes where human decisions, human error, human biases enter the development of these protocols and technologies. I actually did not start to work with scientists until pretty recently. That really began with the 2018 residency that I did at the Philadelphia Science Center. That was their relatively new BioArt residency that's housed at Integral Molecular's lab in the Science Center. And they that's also supported by the Esther Klein Gallery, who's been showing art and science work since the 70s, I believe. So that really became like a much more, opened up a lot broader conversations with scientists than I had the opportunity to have. So in this, you know, I started this residency in 2018, and the exhibition happened in 2019, and then I'm continuing to work with them now in this remote residency. So it's been this really wonderfully long relationship and conversation that has presented a lot of opportunities for a lot of different kind of conversations. So even in just response to the animation that I showed you, scientists kind of getting excited about these kind of quirky narratives that can emerge from the way that I'm presenting these works, and kind of go down their own rabbit hole with reading a lot into the work. A lot more, but it's from a very, you know, specific science point of view, and, you know, integrating their own knowledge of these biological processes into these narratives that I'm kind of laying out with these interactions and these materials.
That's great to hear. Yeah, it's really special to have such a long relationship with the lab, and I can't wait to see, you know, all the things that you do. Another question, and this is probably going to be our last one. Question is, going forward from this pandemic moment, how does your work help us hold on to this important insight into the microbial that you offer, and not fall into a state of microbe phobia due to our fears of viral diseases and related things?
Yeah, it's very easy to be microbial phobic right now. And yeah, I think that I think what I've tried to do with these projects in the past, and what I continue to do even now, is to kind of play with these tendencies of phobia or fascination and create this kind of wavering experience that calls it into question. So that, you know, like with the doilies, with the lace virus doilies, I think that one of the things that happens with those is that people can kind of pick and choose. There's a bit of agency allowed to the viewer where they can kind of pick and choose if they want to think about the virus structure, if they want to think about the tradition of doilies and lace. And so they can kind of wander through those territories as they choose. So I think that that's something that I continue to try to do, where even with these animations or with the fiber, that, you know, there's something kind of familiar or mesmerizing, or, you know, some sort of uncanny movement that draws you in, but that, you know, we're all becoming increasingly familiar with some of these vocabularies that I've been dealing with that, you know, have until now been more niche. And I think that that's been kind of interesting to notice how the conversation is actually expanding rather than contracting. And so I think that there's just more material to explore, and I think like there's more of a sense of urgency about it, and I'm not really interested in like leaving people in a position of fear around it. And so I think some of the challenges that I'm dealing with right now are like dealing with tactility and creating work that can engage a sensory experience, but also consider safety in people engaging with work.
Well, thank you so much, Laura. Such a pleasure to have you on. I will let Carrie wrap us up here.
Great.
Thanks, Julia.
Thanks, everyone. Those were some great questions. And just want to mention, for anyone who joined late, or if you'd like to look back at this is recorded and will be posted on YouTube. We'll be sharing that link on our social media, so you can look back at that. And be sure to join our mailing list at sciartinitiative.org to stay up to date on what else we're doing. And we'll hope to see you next week at our lunch break, Friday, the 29th, this Friday at 1 p.m. with Daniel Ambrosi. Thank you, Laura, so much. And we'll see you all next time.
All right. Bye.